GM's own warranty department just told you which years of the 2.7 TurboMax are bulletproof, and they did it with money, not a press release. 5 years, 100,000 miles, longer coverage than GM puts on its own V8s in the exact same trucks. That isn't a bumper sticker, it's an actuary's math on failure rates. And it says this engine, in its current form, is a safer bet than the engine most people default to instead. But that warranty only tells half the story, because the 2.7 TurboMax you can buy today is not the same engine GM sold in 2019, and the ranking videos calling it fragile are usually talking about that older engine without saying so. A parts and service employee at a GMC dealership recently laid out in detail exactly where the line falls. This video is that line, model year by model year, and the 1 year GM was willing to guarantee it. A few months ago, a channel with over 400,000 views on a single video ranked the 2.7 TurboMax among GMC's worst engines, right alongside engines with well-documented failure histories. The comment section didn't agree, and it didn't agree quietly. A user who identified himself as a parts and service employee at a Chevrolet and GMC dealership posted a 5-paragraph rebuttal that picked up 35 likes, more engagement than most of the video's other top comments combined. His account? The engine had been redesigned at some point in its run with heavier-duty internals. The most common issue he sees on the shop floor is a purge pump that takes about 30 minutes to replace and is usually covered. And in years of working on these trucks, he had never once seen the timing chain failure that everyone online seems afraid of. Another commenter said his friend's 2020 model has over 220,000 miles on it. Oil changes only, occasional towing, still his daily driver, and the dealership tried to buy it back from him last year for $20,000. A third called it the single most reliable engine currently in GM's lineup, better in his experience than the 5.3 or the 6.2. On a different video entirely from a different channel, a shop manager and a used car manager are quoted telling the same customer the same thing in almost the same words. Pretty bulletproof. None of these people are lying, and none of them are inventing their truck's odometer readings. They're also not settling anything because a forum argument between an owner and a skeptic never answers the one question that decides who's right. Which years is each side even talking about? The 2.7 TurboMax has been in production since 2019. Not every one of those model years is the same engine under the hood, even though they all wear the same badge on the fender. And that distinction is exactly what gets lost the moment the conversation collapses into reliable versus unreliable instead of the only question that matters here, which year? GM built the 2.7 TurboMax, internally coded L3B, to do something no small gasoline engine had really done before in a half-ton truck. Match a V8's low-end torque out of 4 cylinders in a full-size Silverado and Sierra without the fuel bill of a V8 riding along for the whole ownership. The ambition behind the engine was real, not marketing copy. High-pressure turbocharging, direct injection, an aluminum block instead of the heavier iron blocks GM had leaned on for decades, and boost mapping aggressive enough to put a diesel-style torque curve into a gasoline 4-cylinder. It's worth saying plainly what this engine was never trying to be. It does not run the cylinder deactivation system that's caused so many lifter complaints on GM's own 5.3 and 6.2 V8s in these same trucks. That's a completely different engine family with a completely different failure mode. And it's one problem this engine simply never had to fix because it was never built with that system in the first place. What it did have to solve was different. On paper and on a test bench, the formula GM's engineers designed worked exactly the way it was supposed to. But a test bench does not tow a camper up a mountain grade in July heat, and it does not sit in stop-and-go traffic for 45 minutes with the air conditioning maxed out and the driver leaning on the throttle every time the light turns green. An engine this ambitious, asked to do a V8's job with a quarter of the cylinders and all of that load concentrated into one small turbocharger, was always going to run into problems a bigger, less boosted engine simply never would. The earliest production years did exactly that, and the complaints that followed were not manufactured by internet drama. A small turbocharger working this hard concentrates an enormous amount of heat into a very small space, far more concentrated than the same total output spread across 8 cylinders in a V8. That heat does not just vanish once you shut the truck off. It keeps cooking the oil sitting in and around the turbo bearings for minutes afterward. It hardens seals faster than a naturally aspirated engine ever would. And on a direct injection engine like this one, with no fuel washing over the intake valves the way it does on a port-injected engine, that same heat accelerates carbon building up on the valves over tens of thousands of miles. None of that is unique to this engine. It's the trade-off every small, hard-working turbo engine makes in exchange for V8 torque out of 4 cylinders, and it's a trade-off GM's engineers understood going in. What they did not fully anticipate, at least not in the first production years, was exactly how much real owners would lean on that turbo day after day in real weather, real traffic, and real towing. Independently documented issues on the 2019 through 2021 trucks include throttle body contamination, carbon buildup sticking the throttle blade badly enough to throw a fault code against what the engine control module was commanding, and fuel injector calibration problems significant enough that General Motors issued service bulletins at the dealer level. On at least one documented 2019 truck, the replacement throttle body itself was on national backorder, with dealers reporting only a handful in stock across the entire country, which tells you something about how new and how strained the supply chain still was in that first production year. These are not invented complaints pulled from an angry forum thread by someone with an axe to grind. They're the kind of early production, growing pains that show up whenever a brand new engine platform gets pushed this hard, this fast, straight into real-world towing, real-world summer heat, and real-world stop-and-go traffic instead of a controlled lab environment with predictable loads. If you bought one of these trucks new in 2019 or 2020 and had a rough first service visit or two, chances are you weren't imagining a problem that didn't exist. The engine's earliest calibration wasn't matched to how people use a truck, and General Motors' own service bulletins from that period say so, in service department language, if not in a press release. Oil behavior was the common thread running underneath almost every early complaint. If knowing the model year before you sign anything, not just the badge on the tailgate, sounds like your kind of channel, subscribe now, because that's the whole job here. The earliest 2.7 TurboMax trucks were calibrated with oil change intervals and oil flow assumptions that simply didn't hold up once real owners started towing, idling, and running short trips instead of long, steady highway miles. Shorter trips especially never let the engine and the oil inside it get fully up to temperature, which let moisture and fuel dilution build up in the oil faster than the factory schedule accounted for. Technicians started noticing sludge, reduced oil pressure under load, and premature wear on the turbo bearings specifically, which is precisely the kind of failure mode that gets misdiagnosed online as the turbo is just weak, when the actual root cause was an oil service interval that was too generous for how the engine was really being driven. General Motors eventually revised the oil specification, the oil pump control strategy, and the official service guidance, but that came after owners, not before them. GM's first real response arrived with the 2022 model year refresh, and by every account, it was a genuine engineering fix, not a marketing refresh dressed up as one. The engine block gained roughly 2 extra pounds of aluminum webbing wrapped around the outer casting, added specifically to cut flex and reduce stress on the internals under sustained towing load. GM used that same refresh to introduce a high-output version of the engine, making significantly more torque than the original, a decision that only makes sense if the people signing off on it trusted the redesigned internals underneath. It addressed a real weakness in the original design, and by most owner accounts from that model year, it worked. In the middle of production on the very next model year, a manufacturing defect nobody caught during the 2022 changes showed up anyway, sitting in a part of the block none of the 2022 fixes had touched. It's worth pausing on why the 2022 refresh looked at the time like the whole story. Owners who bought a 2022 truck reported fewer of the early complaints. The extra webbing did what it was designed to do. It reduced flex under load, and flex was a real contributor to some of the stress-related issues from 2019 through 2021. GM also redesigned the timing chain tensioners for that model year, adding pressure relief valves specifically to keep the chain properly loaded without extra wear under higher cylinder pressure, a change one of the engine's own GM engineers spoke about directly to the automotive press. That's not a fix a company makes to a part it considers a non-issue. None of that was cosmetic. It's exactly why so many current owners of 2022 trucks show up in comment sections defending the engine. And they're not wrong to. They're just describing one specific model year, not the whole 6-year run. It's a mistake worth naming directly because it's the same mistake the ranking video made in the opposite direction. Judging a 6-year engine family by whichever single year happens to be in front of you, good or bad, instead of asking which year you're looking at before forming an opinion either way. Some 2023 Silverado 1500 trucks left the factory with a hairline crack cast directly into the engine block, specifically in the main oil gallery, a casting defect invisible from the outside and completely undetectable until oil pressure eventually failed and the bearings went with it, often with no warning symptoms at all beforehand. This is the part of the story that most GM quietly fix the 2.7 TurboMax videos, either skip entirely or bury in a single throwaway line because it does not fit a tidy one bad year, one good year narrative. GM's actual response was not a recall notice, and it was not a technical service bulletin filed away in a dealer's service manual for a technician to stumble across during an unrelated visit. In February 2024, the company opened a formal customer satisfaction program and instructed every dealer to replace the entire engine at GM's expense on every truck built with the affected casting, regardless of mileage or remaining warranty status. Read that again because it is the single most important sentence in this whole video. Not a software update, not swapping one part, a full engine replacement on GM's dime. For a defect GM itself found, disclosed, and paid to fix at scale. A company hiding a defect does not pull running engines back out of trucks it already sold and delivered. GM did exactly that because it decided the reputation of the entire engine family was worth more than the cost. It is also worth being precise about what this program is and is not, because the language matters. A customer satisfaction program is not the same thing as a federal safety recall, and it does not carry the same public reporting or the same headline. That is exactly why so few owners outside the affected build range ever heard about it, and why most engine ranking videos never mention it at all. It moved through service departments and owner letters, not press releases, which made it easy for anyone building a GM quietly fixed it narrative to undersell what happened, when the honest description is closer to the opposite. This was one of the more expensive things a manufacturer can voluntarily do for a defect that had not yet triggered a formal recall. Go back to that same dealership technician's comment, and it reads differently once you know what GM did in February 2024. He described heavier-duty internals in the newer trucks, a purge pump as his single most common real-world repair, and in his own words, never once seeing the timing chain failure that dominates online discussion of this engine. He posted that months before most owners outside the affected build range had even heard the words customer satisfaction program. To be clear about exactly what this is and isn't, that's one technician's account from one dealership's service bay, not a nationwide statistical study across every GM store in the country, and it should be weighed exactly that way, not treated as gospel simply because it's specific and confident. But it lines up closely with what GM's own service history on this engine shows in aggregate. A company doesn't sign off on a full engine replacement program for a manufacturing defect if the actual plan is to let the whole platform's reputation ride out on hope and forum silence. If you've had a different experience with this engine, a real timing chain issue of your own, or something that flatly doesn't match what this one dealership account describes, that's worth hearing. And it's exactly the kind of gap between forum reputation and shop floor reality this whole video is trying to close. Put it in the comments below, name your model year, and we'll read them. The timing chain fear persists for a reason, even against a dealership account like this one. Turbocharged 4 cylinders as a category earned a rough reputation over the last decade, largely from other manufacturers' engines that did have chain and tensioner problems under high boost, and that reputation transfers by association even to engines that fix the exact weakness that caused it elsewhere. GM's own 2022 tensioner revision, the pressure relief valves added specifically to keep the chain properly loaded, is direct evidence they took that risk seriously rather than dismissing it, which is a very different posture than a company that thinks the fear is baseless and beneath a response. By the time the 2024 model year full-size trucks arrived, GM had folded the redesigned casting, the high-output internals introduced back in 2022, the hard lessons from the customer satisfaction program, and a separate fix on select 2023 and 2024 trucks where GM replaced low-flow fuel injectors and reflashed the engine control module at no cost into a single updated engine, and started marketing it officially under one unified name for the first time, TurboMax. They backed that engine with a 5-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty, longer coverage than GM offers on its own naturally aspirated V8s, sitting on the exact same order sheet in the exact same trucks. A car company does not voluntarily extend a warranty on an engine it's still privately worried about internally. Extended warranties cost real money against a real actuarial risk model built by people whose job is estimating exactly how often engines fail, and GM's own numbers apparently said this engine, in its 2024 form, was a safer financial bet than the V8 parked right next to it on the same showroom floor. The 220,000-mile owner from the comment section, oil changes only, still his daily driver after his dealership tried to buy it back, is one data point and not a controlled study on its own. But it stops looking like a suspicious outlier the moment you know which specific model year he's driving, and starts looking like exactly what a 5-year, 100,000-mile factory warranty was designed from the start to make possible. Compare that warranty decision to what GM did with the engines it was still worried about elsewhere in the same lineup. The 5.3 and 6.2 V8s in these same trucks, the ones that run the cylinder deactivation system behind their own long list of lifter complaints, still carry GM's standard powertrain coverage. 5 years, 60,000 miles. The 2.7 TurboMax gets 5 years and 100,000 miles. 40,000 miles more on the exact same clock. If GM's own actuaries saw the same risk profile across all 3 engines, there'd be no reason to warranty one of them further than the other 2. They didn't, and there is. So here's the actual answer, the one that 495 comments arguing past each other on that one video never quite land on. If you're looking at a 2019 through 2021 truck, Go in with your eyes open and budget for the fuel system and calibration issues that were real for that first generation of this engine, and ask to see the service history before you buy. A 2022 or early 2023 truck is a real, documented improvement over that first generation in almost every way, but before you hand over money, ask the dealer directly whether that specific VIN falls inside the customer satisfaction program's affected build range. And if it does, get the free engine replacement scheduled before you drive it home, because it costs you nothing and it is not optional. A 2024 model year truck, or any earlier truck that's already had that replacement completed and documented, is the version of this engine GM itself was confident enough to put its own name and its own extended warranty behind in writing. The 2.7 TurboMax was never one engine with one single reputation, no matter how many ranking videos and forum arguments keep treating it that way. It was 3 or 4 meaningfully different engines wearing the exact same badge across 6 model years, and only one of them is the version GM is willing to guarantee. If you're cross-shopping against the 5.3 or the 6.2 in the same lot, remember that those engines come with their own well-documented AFM-related lifter issues, so the idea of just getting the V8 isn't automatically the safer decision either. It trades one engine's growing pains for a different engine family's known weak point. The honest version of this comparison for any of these engines always comes down to the same question: which specific model year, not which badge. Know the year, check the build range against the customer satisfaction program, confirm the paperwork if a replacement was done, and the 2.7 TurboMax stops being a coin flip and starts being exactly what GM itself is willing to put a warranty behind.